On the day my daughter got married, I thought it would be the happiest day of my life, a day filled with laughter, warmth, and the love of family. I believed it would be a place of unity and joy, but I was wrong. As I stepped up to the table, raising my glass to toast everyone, I never expected my son-in-law to burst out laughing, his voice dripping with contempt. He's nothing more than a waiter, not worthy of being in a place for the elite like this. In that moment, my heart shattered, my face burned hot, and it felt as if the sky itself had collapsed over me. Yet I held my composure, smiled, and gently filled the glasses as though I hadn't heard a word. And then, the unexpected happened. A guest stared at me in shock and exclaimed, "Oh my God, you're really the man from that television show, aren't you?" The entire hall fell silent. My son-in-law's jaw dropped, his eyes widened in disbelief, his body froze stiff like stone. The wineglass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. And that sound of breaking glass marked the beginning of his downfall. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. He's nothing but a waiter, just a worthless, ordinary waiter. Daniel Harrington, my soon-to-be son-in-law, spat out the words with a cold edge, his voice carrying across the entire hall. His fingers stabbed the air in my direction, his eyes sharp as blades, dripping with contempt, as though he could erase my very existence in front of everyone. A ripple of laughter escaped from a few guests. They nodded in smug agreement, treating me like the evening's cheap entertainment at this glittering wedding. I kept my head lowered, calmly pouring their champagne, my face unreadable, as if I hadn't heard a thing. But then from a nearby table, a voice cut through the room, sharp and electrifying. "Oh my God, isn't that man on television?" In an instant, the entire hall froze. Every gaze turned toward the screen mounted on the wall. Daniel swung his head around. The moment his eyes landed on the image flashing across the screen, his hand began to tremble violently. The glass slipped from his fingers, crashing onto the marble floor. The sound of shattering crystal rang out like a verdict, cold, final, and merciless. The mocking smiles vanished at once. The same guests who had sneered at me now stared wide-eyed, their faces painted with shock. The room was swallowed by a storm of shifting emotions, mockery dissolving into astonishment, indifference giving way to awe. And in that single moment, everything changed. Before we continue, I'd like to invite you to leave a comment below with this exact phrase: "True family cannot be bought with money," and let me know where you're listening from, because what happens next will certainly take you by surprise. The gift box in my hand suddenly felt far heavier than its actual weight. Stretching before me was Daniel Harrington's home, a palace of marble and glass, soulless and cold, arranged only to flaunt a false sense of perfection. From the kitchen, Isabella appeared. "Dad, I've been waiting so much for you to come," she said softly. She rushed over, kissed my cheek, her smile radiant yet tinged with unease. Her eyes flickered briefly to the box in my hands. "Oh, a gift? I'm sure I'll love it." "Your grandfather's watch," I replied, steadying my voice against the swell of emotion. "I thought you'd want it on your wedding day." For a brief, fragile moment, her eyes lit up with childlike wonder. Her trembling hands brushed the box, filled with joy and tenderness. But that joy faltered as she cast a furtive glance past my shoulder. Daniel emerged, a glass of wine in hand, his posture arrogant, his brows knitted, his cold gaze swept over me, as though I had stained the marble floor beneath his feet. "Edward," he said, offering a curt, dismissive handshake, "still working at that little Italian restaurant?" I kept my tone even. "Bella Vista, Marco Alvarez has always treated me well." Daniel smirked, his words cutting like a blade into my dignity. "An Italian restaurant job suits you perfectly, old man." The air froze. Isabella clutched the box tightly, her eyes wide with distress, caught helplessly between the cruel fracture of blood and marriage. Daniel's eyes flicked toward the gift box in my hands, not with curiosity but with a look of disdain. Isabella leaned forward, her voice filled with excitement. "It's grandfather's watch. Dad, can I see it?" I carefully peeled back the wrapping paper, revealing a gold pocket watch passed down through generations. Isabella's eyes sparkled with emotion, reflecting her deep attachment to the heirloom. But Daniel only narrowed his gaze, the corner of his mouth curling into a mocking smirk. "An old trinket," he said coldly, "might be worth more sold off to a collector than cluttering up space here." An old trinket. His dismissive words cut through me like a blade. This wasn't about money. This was family history, heritage handed from father to child. From the dining room, Aunt Linda called out, "Dinner is ready." We entered a room so opulent it felt almost hostile. The chandelier blazed too brightly, casting light that exaggerated every wrinkle, every speck of dust, as if to expose anyone unworthy of belonging there. Crystal glasses stood in rigid rows, cutlery gleamed harshly. I sat where Isabella indicated, feeling smaller and more out of place than ever. The tension was suffocating. Each clink of silverware on porcelain sounded like a cold incision. The ticking of the wall clock marked every heavy heartbeat. A few guests stole glances at me, only to quickly turn back to their meals, afraid to be drawn into the divide. I tried to start a conversation. "Wedding preparations must be exciting. How many guests are you planning to invite?" Daniel sliced his steak with clinical precision, like a surgeon. "We'll keep it intimate. Close friends, business associates." Isabella added, "My colleagues, Daniel's partners, and, of course, family." "Of course," Daniel repeated, his voice carrying an edge that made me look up. The talk shifted to venues, flowers, catering. I remained mostly silent, offering a few words here and there. Daniel grew increasingly curt, his gaze like ice. At last, he set down his utensils, crossed his arms, and leaned back in his chair like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. "Edward, we need to talk." Isabella froze, her fork suspended midair. "Daniel." "It's about the wedding," he cut her off, his tone commanding, as though he were in a boardroom. "I've been thinking about the guest list, about the kind of atmosphere we need to create." My chest tightened. "What is it?" Daniel leaned back fully, his eyes sharp as knives. "My guests are influential senators, CEOs, powerful investors. This isn't just a wedding, it's a networking event. And to be blunt," he paused, then dropped the words like a hammer, "you're a waiter. The people I've invited will be seated with senators, with tycoons. Do you really think you belong in that world?" The room froze. I felt blood rush to my face, my hand tightening around the napkin. Isabella reacted immediately. "That's my father." Daniel turned to her, voice smooth but laced with scorn. "I know, and I respect that. But this wedding isn't a family gathering, it's an investment in our future. If he shows up, his very presence will taint this day." I trembled, fighting to keep calm. I raised Isabella, worked overtime shifts to pay for her education. Daniel tilted his head, cutting me off with a frigid smile. "How pitiful. You bled yourself dry just so she could step into a world you'll never touch." My heart ached. Before I could answer, he stood. "We should speak in private. Come to the balcony." The sliding glass door shut behind us, sealing off Isabella's protests. Outside, the night air bit at my skin, but Daniel stood firm, his suit crisp, his presence cold and imposing. Below us, workers arranged rows of white chairs, sterile, merciless, as though preparing for my public humiliation. Daniel rested a hand on the railing, city lights reflected in his eyes. "Beautiful, isn't it? This house cost $2.3 million. The wedding alone is over $300,000. I stammered, nearly spilling the water in my hand. $300,000? Yes. Flowers 15 grand, photography 8, Isabella's dress 14. He recited each figure with the detached precision of a financial report. I bit my lip, forcing steadiness into my voice. I worked double shifts, saved every tip, paid for Berkeley, for the apartment, for the car. Daniel lowered his voice, enunciating every word. "That was then. Now she's my fiancée. And you have no place here." I went silent, my eyes drifting to Isabella through the glass. She was pacing, restless, powerless. "Fine," I whispered at last, my voice breaking. "I won't come." Satisfaction flickered in Daniel's eyes, his lips curving into a victorious grin. Good. Then we understand each other. I turned away, catching a glimpse of my reflection in the glass, aged, worn, as though I'd already been erased from this world. Edward, Daniel called sharply, leave the watch. Isabella doesn't need a poor man's relic staining her $14,000 dress. I stood frozen for a moment, the box suddenly heavy as stone in my hands. Without turning back, I walked inside. Dad, wait, Isabella cried, her voice breaking. I kissed her forehead and held the watch tighter. It's all right, my daughter. Congratulations on your engagement. I walked out of Daniel Harrington's mansion with shoulders weighed down, as if carrying the humiliation he had just branded onto me. I didn't look back. I let the sting of rejection seep into my skin, sharp and biting like the winter cold. The road home took me through 3 different worlds. First, the wealthy enclave where Daniel lived. Lawns trimmed with surgical precision, electronic gates gleaming, and cameras glaring like fortress sentinels. Then, the quiet suburbs, orderly houses lined up in their calm distance. And finally, my world-cramped apartment blocks, clustered together like weather-beaten companions clinging to each other through endless storms. The hallway of my building greeted me with mildew and the drip of leaking pipes. The fluorescent light above flickered half-heartedly, sputtering on and off as if tired of illuminating such a place. My footsteps echoed down the corridor, sounding less like movement and more like fate tapping its finger on the table. Inside my 1-bedroom apartment, there were no chandeliers or art on the walls. Only the distant hum of the city leaked in through the window, amplifying the heaviness of solitude. Yet on one wall hung a row of photographs of Isabella graduations, birthdays, Christmases, days when joy still glowed bright, even when money was scarce. I placed my grandfather's pocket watch on the kitchen table, unable to take my eyes off it. 3 generations of Millers had held this heirloom. Daniel dismissed it as something valuable to a collector, but he would never understand. This watch didn't just measure time, it measured sweat, sacrifice, and now, the countdown to a reckoning. I powered on my computer. Numbers filled the screen. Isabella's tuition, $42,000 a year. Room and board, $18,000. The down payment for her first car, $3,000. Her first apartment, another $2,000. Over $200,000 in total earned dollar by dollar, tip by tip, shift by shift, until my body nearly gave out. The numbers mocked me, dancing on the screen like a cruel joke at my expense. My phone vibrated. Isabella was calling. Dad, her voice trembled, breaking under guilt. I'm so sorry about tonight. I feel ashamed. It's my wedding, and I couldn't even protect you. I closed my eyes, my chest tightening. It's all right, my daughter. I've endured shame all my life. If you're happy, I can swallow every insult. A pause. Then my voice hardened, dropping like a vow. But sometimes, to protect happiness, a father must do the one thing no one ever expects. Through my window, the glittering lights of Bella Vista shimmered in the distance, mocking me with their sterile beauty. They stared down like eyes filled with contempt, reminding me I was nothing more than an invisible waiter. And in my mind, Daniel's voice hissed again, sharp as a blade. You're just a waiter, just a waiter. I opened my closet. Hanging there was the familiar uniform. Black trousers, white shirt, black waistcoat. For years, it had been my cloak of invisibility, blending me into the background of banquets, serving the rich, remembered by no one. But tonight, it was no longer a symbol of submission. Each button fastened became a piece of armor. Each frayed seam was a scar, proof of years lived in obscurity. Tonight, it would conceal not service, but a plan. I remembered the night Isabella turned 8. I was pouring wine at a lavish party, eyes glued to this very watch, counting the minutes so I could leave in time to blow out her candles. I sprinted home, still reeking of smoke and alcohol, just to catch her smile as the flames went out. That sacrifice, Daniel would never understand. I held the waistcoat in my hands and smiled. Tomorrow, I would call Marco Alvarez, an old brother in arms from the service industry. now managing a high-end catering company for luxury weddings. I would not approach him as Edward Miller, the father-in-law Daniel scorned, but as Edward Miller, the invisible waiter, the man who knew how to slip into a crowd and vanish. Daniel wanted to erase me from Isabella's wedding, to protect it from the embarrassment of my presence. What he would never suspect was that the man pouring wine into his glass would be the very one he had humiliated on that balcony. The table lamp cast its glow onto the watch, its golden face gleaming like a promise. It had witnessed sacrifice. Now it would witness revenge. And as the second hand ticked forward, I knew the moment to reclaim my rightful place in my daughter's wedding was drawing near. A smile spread across my lips, cold and resolute. Daniel Harrington was about to learn that there are battles no amount of money or arrogance can ever win. That afternoon, the private ballroom at Bella Vista glowed like a dream. Everything moved with the precision of a perfectly tuned machine. 6 hours had passed since my conversation with Marco Alvarez, 6 hours of wearing a calm mask, serving guests as though nothing had happened, while my heart counted down each breath to tomorrow. Round tables draped in white cloth stood neatly arranged like tiny islands, each crystal glass catching the chandelier light. But instead of shimmering beauty, that light fractured into sharp blades suspended above us, waiting for the right moment to strike. I walked between the tables, straightening corners, as if I were preparing not only for a wedding banquet, but for an inevitable confrontation. Then came the sound of footsteps heavy, echoing against the marble floor like a gavel striking judgment. I lifted my head. Isabella's laughter drifted in first, bright but laced with unease. Moments later, Daniel Harrington appeared, his eyes dark, his brows knitted, his lips curled into a mocking smile. "Dad," Isabella's voice trembled at the doorway, soft and fragile, as though she stood on the edge of a precipice. She forced a smile, but her eyes flickered nervously toward Daniel, her hands clutching at her dress. I returned her smile gently. "Isabella." Daniel cut in immediately, his tone sharp as steel. "What are you doing here?" "I'm working," I replied evenly. "Marco asked me to help with preparations." Daniel gave a dry, scornful laugh, his gaze sweeping over the waiter's uniform I wore. "You think playing servant here gives you dignity? To me, you're just a parasite trying to sneak into a place you don't belong." Isabella stepped forward, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Please, stop. This is supposed to be the happiest day of my life." But Daniel pressed on. He advanced, pointing a finger in my face. "Tomorrow, you won't get the chance. I'll make sure you're nothing but a shadow outside those doors." My grip tightened around the edge of the tablecloth. Slowly, I raised my head, my voice low and unyielding. "You can erase my name from your guest list, but you cannot erase a father's blessing for his daughter. You're mistaken, Daniel. I don't need an audience. I only need Isabella to know her father is here." Isabella's voice broke as tears spilled down her cheeks. The tissue in her hand tore apart from her desperate grip. "You're tearing my wedding apart. I am not some prize to be fought over." The air thickened, frozen with tension. The crystal glasses trembled faintly, reflecting the weight of the silence. Daniel spun on his heel, his footsteps thundering toward the exit, each one like a warning. "You'll see. I'll put an end to this." Isabella turned back once more, her eyes filled with guilt. "I'm sorry, Dad." I placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, whispering, "Don't worry. Tomorrow all I want is your happiness." They left, and the room, though glittering, felt colder than ever. I returned to adjusting chairs and linens, though my hands trembled slightly. Through the window, I watched their car disappear into the night. And within me, a vow solidified, quiet yet resolute. He may have wealth and power, but I have something he will never touch: the love of Isabella. And tomorrow, that love will carry me through every door he tries to shut. The last light of day streamed through the towering glass windows of Bella Vista, painting the banquet hall in streaks of crimson that bled across the walls before giving way to encroaching darkness. I bent over the final piece of silverware, polishing it until the faint rasp of the cloth drowned out the storm of thoughts swirling inside me. The tables stood in perfect rows, immaculate and waiting, like regiments poised for battle. Yet to me, this room was no longer a place of celebration. It was a silent battlefield, ready to erupt. Then came the sharp screech of hinges creak. The kitchen door swung open, its shrill protest like an omen. Marco Alvarez emerged, his face drawn tight, carrying an intensity that made my stomach sink. "Edward, my friend." His voice was heavy, his eyes glinting with steel. "We need to talk." I set the silver spoon down, unease tightening in my chest. "What happened?" Marco pulled out a chair and sat, an act rare for him during working hours. That gesture alone told me, bad news. "Your son-in-law was here." My hand froze. "When?" "An hour ago. He pulled up in his flashy car, walking in like he owned the place. And then," Marco's calloused fist slammed against the table, rattling the cutlery until the spoon rolled onto the floor. "He made me an offer I was never supposed to refuse." My chest constricted. Of course. Daniel Harrington had never learned to accept defeat. He was a predator, sniffing out threats on what he considered his territory. "What offer?" Marco leaned forward, lowering his voice. $5,000, cash, just to keep you from working tomorrow." The number hit me like a blow, 5,000 more than 2 months of income, enough to steady Marco's struggling restaurant. To Daniel, it was nothing more than pocket change. A coin slipped carelessly from his wallet. "And what did you tell him?" "Sothers singly and temurapt. Sothers in 25 to be mad advancer. Sothers in 25 temurapted. Sothers in 25 to be maddled temurapted. Sothers in 25 to be maddled temurapted. Sothers in 25 to be maddled temurapted. Sothers in 25. Marco's gaze met mine, unflinching. His voice was hard as iron. "I told him my principles aren't for sale." My throat tightened with gratitude, though he wasn't finished. He got angry. He threatened me, talked about health inspectors, liquor licenses, city officials he has in his pocket. Then he smirked and said, Marco paused, his lip curling with disdain, "that you're nothing but a delusional old man, a shadow he would erase from Isabella's life." Each word landed like a dagger. I clenched my fist, forcing calm, even as a cold determination flickered to life inside me. "He doubled it," Marco continued, his tone sharp. 10,000. As if I were some desperate immigrant too stupid to understand the price of dignity. I drew in a deep breath, the chill settling into my chest. Daniel didn't just want me out of the wedding. He feared me, feared what I might say, what I might do in front of his powerful guests. "I'm sorry, Marco, that he—" "Don't call it intimidation," Marco cut me off with a bitter laugh. "He can make all the phone calls he wants tonight. But remember this, Edward. I have friends too. Not wealthy, but loyal, and loyalty cannot be bought." I picked up the silver spoon again, rubbing it so hard the metal left faint marks on my fingers, as if I were sharpening my will itself. The glittering chandeliers above no longer seemed elegant, but cold, reflecting my solitude and my resolve. "And tomorrow?" I asked. "Tomorrow, you'll still be here." Marco rose, his eyes blazing. "Giuseppe will expect you at 11, and if your son-in-law tries to cause trouble, he'll learn that even immigrants know how to fight back." I glanced at the crystal glasses gleaming like hidden weapons, and in silence I vowed, "Tomorrow I will walk through that wedding like a ghost he will never be rid of." "Thank you, Marco," I said quietly. "Don't thank me yet." He paused, his voice heavy. "Men like him never quit. Tonight he'll pull more strings, set more traps. Tomorrow may not just be a wedding, it could be war." I looked around the hall one last time, the pristine white flowers, the neatly lined chairs, the polished wine glasses. Perfection on the surface, but beneath it all a storm waiting to break. "Then so be it," I replied, my voice cold. "Tomorrow I'll be exactly where I belong, and Daniel will face a father who cannot be bought, threatened, or erased." With that, I switched off the lights. The hall plunged into darkness, and in that darkness, a silent vow burned bright within me. Tomorrow would be the final battle. 22 hours of waiting had led to this moment. The Bella Vista ballroom glittered under towering crystal chandeliers, their brilliance so sharp it seemed to expose every flaw. White roses cascaded from tall vases, each petal catching the light like fragments of diamonds. Yet to me, this scene of elegance felt heavy like a gilded prison. I moved silently through the sea of guests, balancing a silver tray of champagne. The black vest and bow tie rendered me invisible, a shadow in plain sight. With every step, the reflections off crystal glasses no longer looked like glimmers of beauty, they gleamed like blades suspended above my head. The guests arrived in waves: tech executives in $1,000 suits, venture capitalists boasting of millions, city officials whose handshakes could alter policy. These were Daniel's people, the world he had built and believed flawless. I bowed slightly as I offered my tray to a woman in pearls, her evening gown likely worth more than half a year of my wages. "Champagne, madam." She smiled politely. How elegant. Daniel certainly knows how to host. That casual compliment cut deep, but I only nodded and moved on. An older gentleman in a tuxedo approached, his sharp eyes studying me. "Your bearing is remarkable. You remind me of men who once commanded, not merely served." I dipped my head. "Would you care for an hors d'oeuvre, sir?" He selected a smoked salmon canapé, nodding approvingly. "Yes, service as an art, rare these days." For the briefest moment, warmth touched my heart. But across the room, Daniel Harrington's gaze hunted me. His lips curled into a smirk each time our eyes met, as though silently counting down the seconds until I would break. A young woman asked me to help her grandmother to a seat. I carefully guided the frail lady through the tables, her hand trembling yet trusting on my arm. "You are a true gentleman," she whispered. "Your parents must have raised you well." If only she knew. My parents had been gone for decades. What she saw in me was not their legacy, but the composure forged through years beneath the lights of grander halls than this one. At the head table, Isabella Miller glowed in her wedding gown. When her eyes found me, she smiled, grateful, guilty, proud, but her joy trembled like a thread too thin to hold against the coming storm. And then, the storm arrived. Daniel rose, tapping his silver spoon against a glass. The ringing carried through the hall, a signal that froze every sound. Cutlery stopped mid-air, glasses stilled, breaths were held. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel began, his voice warm and confident. "Thank you for joining Isabella and me on this extraordinary evening. We are surrounded by the most important people, those who shape our community, those who define the future." Scattered applause followed. Isabella lifted her gaze, her eyes shining. But I saw the corner of Daniel's mouth twitch upward. He wasn't finished. "Success," he continued, his tone hardening, "is knowing your place, knowing who matters and who does not." A chill traced my spine. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Then Daniel pointed directly at me. "Take this man, Edward Miller, a relic, someone who once might have been, but is now nothing more than a servant pouring drinks for us. 40 years, and what has he built? Nothing. Just a waiter wearing the mask of a past that no longer matters." Isabella froze, her smile shattering. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, many averting their eyes from me. Loneliness closed in, pressing against my chest, but my hands remained steady. "There are builders," Daniel declared, raising his glass like a judge pronouncing sentence. "And there are servers. There are leaders, and there are followers. That is the order of things. And tonight, we honor only those who stand above." Silence crushed the room. I set the champagne bottle down on the nearest table. My vest smoothed beneath my hand, my bow tie straightened in old instinct, a ritual from another life. Then I lifted my head, my voice calm but firm. "Excuse me, is there a glass that remains unfilled?" The pause was electric. Then, slowly, a woman near the window extended her glass. Her face was stern, but her eyes glimmered with quiet defiance. A few others followed, nodding subtly, some even offering faint smiles. I poured each glass with precision, with dignity. Every step I took, every measured gesture, was a silent strike against Daniel's arrogance. He gripped his own glass tighter, his lips pressed thin. His attack had failed. My composure had turned his cruelty into his own humiliation. At the head table, Isabella lifted her napkin to her face, tears streaming down. "Dad, I'm so sorry." I leaned toward her, my voice low and warm. "Today is your wedding day, my daughter. Nothing else matters." Daniel's eyes burned with fury, but the murmur of the crowd had returned not in admiration of him, but in whispers of discomfort, their memory of this night now forever tainted. And I knew then, they would leave Bella Vista with one memory etched deep, that on Daniel Harrington's wedding day, it was not the grandeur they remembered, but his pettiness and cruelty, forever staining the night he wanted to call perfect. 15 minutes had passed since Daniel Harrington finished his speech, yet instead of the expected waves of laughter, the room remained shrouded in a heavy silence, as though an invisible haze lingered in the air. The scattered laughter of the guests sounded hollow and strained. Forks and knives scraped plates with a jarring sharpness, each clang cutting deeper into the tense atmosphere. I moved quietly, continuing my work as if nothing had changed, clearing plates, refilling glasses, each movement practiced and discreet. My silence was a curtain that allowed me to vanish into the background, unseen amidst the forced laughter and awkward toasts. At the far end of the room, near the back wall, a young man in his 20s scrolled lazily through his phone. Every so often, he glanced up at the large television playing a black-and-white classic film, a signature touch. Marco Alvarez, the Bella Vista's head chef, always used to give his events a touch of Hollywood nostalgia. At first, the young man's eyes skimmed indifferently across the screen. But then he froze. His body leaned forward, eyes widening, locked onto the image before him as if entranced. I was stooping to pick up an empty glass nearby when his chair screeched loudly against the polished floor, shattering the fragile silence of the evening. "Wait a second. No way." His voice trembled with disbelief, then burst out louder, enough for half the hall to hear. "That's him, isn't it? On the screen." The room stilled. A few guests turned their heads toward the television. Others quickly set down their glasses and looked at me. The young man's excitement spread like a spark falling onto dry grass. The word "waiter" began to ripple from table to table, whispered like a stone tossed into a still pond, each echo widening. An elderly woman in an emerald green dress adjusted her glasses, squinting from the screen to me and back again. Suddenly, her eyes lit with recognition. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "My God, I remember that film. He was extraordinary." The whole theater stood to applaud. No one could embody a role with such heart. A murmur swept through the guests. Fingers tapped rapidly on smartphones, searching my name. The rhythm of those taps rose like a chorus, signaling that the truth was no longer containable. On the television, a young naval officer gazed out with eyes full of conviction, speaking lines that carried unshakable hope. In real life, just a few meters away, stood an older man with graying hair, holding a tray, quietly wiping a table. The contrast stunned the room into silence. Then crash. A champagne glass slipped from Daniel's hand and shattered against a plate. Every head turned. The man who had mocked me earlier now sat pale and sweating, his grip whitening around the edge of his chair. And then, from the far corner, the young man shouted with the thrill of an announcer at a grand event. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a true movie star serving us champagne tonight." The hall erupted. Guests gasped, voices overlapping, phones glowing as search results confirmed the truth. A woman's voice rang out as she read aloud. "Edward Miller, starred in 7 major films between 1988 and 1995, nominated for a Golden Globe for Atlantic Crossing." At the head table, Isabella Miller lifted her hand to cover her mouth. Her wide eyes, first shocked, slowly softened into pride. That look pierced me deeper than any applause could. A gentleman nearby asked in a steady voice, "But why did you never tell anyone?" I straightened, meeting his gaze with calm clarity. "Because tonight belongs to my daughter, not my past." The room fell into reverent silence. I set the tray down, unfastened the apron from around my waist, and folded it aside. The simple act felt heavy, like peeling away a mask I had worn for decades. Looking across the hall, I spoke. Yes, that was me in that film. I was once an actor, but when Isabella was born, I chose to leave the stage. I chose love over hollow applause. I chose honest work over fleeting fame. And I have never once regretted that choice. Isabella's tears spilled freely as she rushed toward me. Her wedding gown swept the floor as guests stepped aside, forming a path. She grasped my calloused hands tightly. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me?" I smiled, brushing her tears away. "Because the past doesn't define us. What matters is that I'm here, with you, on the happiest day of your life." She sobbed softly. "You gave up everything for me." I shook my head. I gained everything. I had a daughter to raise and 28 years to watch her grow. No role, no award could give me more than that. The hall held its breath. Then, an older gentleman rose, lifting his glass high. "You, sir, are a true gentleman." Applause began softly, then grew, rolling like a wave until the entire hall was on its feet. "To Edward," someone called. "To men who choose family," another voice shouted. The cheers roared, the clapping thundered, and Isabella threw her arms around me as the ovation drowned out the music. At the head table, Daniel sat frozen, his face ghostly pale. The man who had sneered at me hours earlier was now nothing more than a hollow shadow, lost amidst the brilliance of his own wedding. The noise in the banquet hall slowly subsided, leaving behind only scattered whispers, like the lingering echoes of a storm that had just swept through. The air around the bar felt thick, almost suffocating, clinging to every breath I took. The warm yellow light spilled across the polished tiles, stretching my shadow long across the floor like a lone figure standing before judgment. Each faint clink of silverware against glass rang out sharp and metallic, beating like a cold rhythm to an evening steeped in tension. The bartender, a young man with a neatly faded haircut, adjusted his slightly crooked bow tie before quietly setting a cup of coffee in front of me. Yet his eyes carried more than simple courtesy, they held curiosity, caution, as if trying to piece together who I really was in the story whispered all around the room. I gave him a nod of thanks, wrapping my hands around the cup, letting its warmth steady the unease trembling inside me. Then, from my left, a voice broke the silence, a voice so familiar it sent a shiver racing down my spine. Warm, resonant, tinged with emotion, and a hint of gentle reproach. "Edward Miller, my God. After all these years you vanished, and here you are, pouring coffee instead of standing in front of the camera." I turned. Standing there was Thomas Reed. His smile was broad, wide as the Mississippi, but in his eyes flickered something else, regret, as though he were seeing a ghost step straight out of the silver screen. Time had carved deeper lines into his face and dusted his hair with gray, yet the spark, the very spark that once lit up the sets we shared, was still alive. "Thomas," I breathed, and for the first time that night I felt my shoulders lighten. "What are you doing here?" "My niece's wedding," he said, nodding toward the dance floor, then squinted at me with a half grin. "Never thought I'd run into you, and even less expected to see you pop up on television again tonight. You hardly look any different." I chuckled, though the sound carried weight. "Trust me, Thomas, I've changed more than you can imagine." He leaned an elbow on the bar, his voice dropping lower, laced with something between sorrow and admiration. "You were the best of us, Edward, and yet you walked away right when you were at your peak. None of us ever understood why." I drew in a slow breath, my gaze drifting to nowhere in particular. Life had other plans, and I had no choice but to follow. For a moment he was silent, then he gave a slow nod. "Maybe so, but looking at you now, it seems you managed to turn it into something worthwhile." We sat together, reminiscing about sets long gone, about friends now scattered across different lives. For a fleeting instant, I could almost hear the laughter, the applause, the steady hum of the cameras echoing faintly back from the past. But the illusion shattered with the sharp crash of a glass breaking at a distant table, pulling me harshly back into the cold reality. Thomas raised his glass, his voice low and heavy, carrying the weight of years and missed chances. "To the roads we've traveled, and to the opportunities that will never return." I gently tapped my coffee cup against his. to both." He gave me a small nod before returning to his table, leaving me alone with the quiet ache stirring in my chest. I drained the last of my coffee, bracing myself for the storm that I knew still waited ahead. Daniel Harrington stepped toward the microphone. The once boisterous hall fell into a tense hush, as if the very air had thickened. Forks froze in midair, the faint clink of silverware against crystal faded, and even the background music cut off abruptly. The ceiling lights poured down on his face, casting him in the spotlight like a man standing before a jury of hundreds. Guests exchanged wary glances. A few smirked, expecting yet another arrogant display. But Daniel's fingers trembled as he tapped the microphone, pausing to catch his breath. His voice cracked as he began. "Ladies and gentlemen," he swallowed hard, his gaze darting across the crowd before finally landing on me. "Tonight, I committed something unforgivable. I humiliated my own father-in-law, right here at my wedding, before all of you." The entire room held its breath. Even the kitchen staff peeked out, straining to hear more. "I was wrong, completely wrong." His voice broke, his eyes glistening. "I was blinded by arrogance, by status, by money, and nearly lost the most precious thing of all, this family. To our—" His trembling eyes searched for me, desperate, like a man awaiting his sentence, yet clinging to hope for forgiveness. "Edward Miller is not just a waiter. He is an extraordinary father, a man of integrity, who sacrificed the brilliance of his career to raise his daughter with love and devotion. And I am sorry it took me until tonight to see that truth." A chair scraped the floor. I stepped out from my quiet corner near the bar and walked toward the head table. Each footstep tightened the silence, the tension crackling like a taut string. No one knew if I would reject or accept him. Isabella rose from her seat, tears streaming down her face, clutching her chest as though holding her heart together. I stopped in front of Daniel. He shook when I extended my hand. He seized it with both of his, trembling with regret, not just a gesture, but a bridge across the chasm carved by his cruelty. "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I used to fear that your bond with Isabella would make me small." I held his gaze. "You made yourself small. Apologies are only the beginning, Daniel. From now on, your actions will be your real words." Isabella stepped forward, her wedding gown glowing like a cloud in the light, her face wet with tears, fragile yet radiant with strength. She wrapped her arms around both of us. "I love you both," she choked. Applause erupted, thunderous and genuine. It wasn't polite formality anymore, it was the sound of people witnessing something rare: reconciliation. Some wept openly, moved by the moment. Marco Alvarez emerged from the kitchen, his sun-worn hand pressing firmly on my shoulder, a silent witness to 2 decades of friendship that now culminated in vindication. Daniel lifted his champagne glass. Tonight was meant to celebrate love and a new beginning. And now I understand. Love is not just between 2 people, it's also about honoring those who shaped them. So, let us raise our glasses to Edward Miller, actor, father, and the man who taught my wife that true success is placing family above all else. Glasses clinked in harmony, the sound ringing with sincerity. What had begun as a showcase of vanity transformed into a celebration of character. Isabella slipped her arm through mine, her voice tender. "Dad, will you dance the father-daughter dance with me?" "Always," I replied. We stepped onto the dance floor. Music swelled as guests formed a circle around us. In the mirror's reflection, I still saw the man in a waiter's vest, but no longer a servant. Tonight, I was a father, fulfilled and whole, beside my daughter. At the edge of the crowd, Thomas Reed raised his glass, his eyes shimmering. An elderly guest leaned in and whispered, This is what people will remember about this wedding." I walked into my daughter's wedding overflowing with joy and pride. Every father dreams of this moment, to see his little girl in her white dress, radiant and full of happiness, ready to begin a brand new chapter of her life. I believed that night would be filled with love, unity, and the warmth of family. But in a single instant, everything changed. A voice cut through the laughter, and suddenly I was no longer the proud father of the bride. I was reduced to nothing more than a waiter. The entire room froze, glasses slipped from trembling hands, and the celebration fell into silence as every eye turned toward me. What happened next was something no one in that grand hall could have ever imagined, and it all began with one cruel insult. If you want to know how Edward Miller turned humiliation into an unforgettable turning point, stay with me. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next chapters of this story.